Is there a strategy that'll help you grow your company faster? CEO Sales Strategies is an investigative business podcast for entrepreneurial people who never stop asking questions. Highly acclaimed sales revenue growth expert Doug C. Brown interviews CEOs, business owners, and professionals who serve them to uncover and share actionable tips and methods behind their bulletproof sales strategies. Topics covered on the show include their failures, struggles, secrets, and processes that help them succeed in selling millions to billions of dollars of their products and services, all with the sole aim of helping you grow your business. If you are eager to know the most effective sales secrets from the A players of the game, then the CEO Sales Strategies podcast is certainly the place to be.
Hey everyone, this is Doug C. Brown with the CEO Sales Strategies podcast, bringing you another amazing guest. His name is Mr. Fred Diamond. He owns a company called the Institute for Excellence in Sales. We're going to be talking a lot on this podcast about women in sales. And men, before you go and say, "Whoa, this isn't for me," believe me, it's for you. It's about how women are entering into the field. It's how women are really starting to dominate the field in many capacities and why they're doing so and what we can learn from this whole process. So, for example, empathy. Not a lot of men are as empathetic as women. It's pretty much across the board. But the reality is that men have strengths, women have strengths. We're going to talk about the strengths of women. We're also going to talk about why you as an employer may want women on your staff to balance out what you're trying to do. Now, sales has shifted over the last few years, basically shifting over the last, in my estimation, 7 years or so, but it's been shifting a little slower. And now with the pandemic that happened, boom, it's starting to shift in a very big way. Fred's been working with women and focusing on women in sales for a long period of time, has a lot of great things to say, and we have a really bunch of cool information that we were talking about that we could bring to you so that you can also adjust your sales process if you're male to be able to sell to more women. And if you're dealing with more women in general, you can also understand where they're coming from. Women, you can also understand where men are coming from, because Fred and I also discussed that. So without further ado, let's go to Mr. Fred Diamond. Here we go. Welcome to the CEO Sales Strategy Podcast. Thanks for being here.
I am excited, Doug. I'm very excited to hear your question. So let's get to it.
Well, we're going to talk about women in selling today, right? Women in sales. And I find this is a topic of fascination for me because I have 3 women in my household, and they sell. And but you know, when it comes to employers and corporate environment, you know, it's a little different than the men selling world in some regards. I disagree that it should be, but I found it to be. So why don't I turn it over to you? Like, why do women in general, I think, even make better salespeople than men? I know.
Yeah, sorry to cut you off. It's a funny story. So I run what's called the Institute for Excellence in Sales, and we're a member-based organization. I'm based in Northern Virginia, right outside of Washington, D.C. And typically our customers, we call them partners, are companies with at least 100 sales professionals. And our mission is to help those employers attract, retain, motivate, and elevate top-tier talent. I'll tell you how this whole thing started. And it's actually great that the 2 men in sales are talking about women in sales, because we're very proud to be an ally to help women in sales. About 8 years ago, there's a guy in the DC area. He runs at the time, it was $1 billion company. Now it's an $8 billion company. And when we created the Institute for Excellence in Sales, he said, you know, if you could think about this, I'd be interested in helping support what you're trying to do. He said, at the time, he said, half of my sales professionals are men and half of my sales professionals are women. He said the women perform 8 to 9% better than the men. He was very meticulous in his metrics. He said, I can't understand, though, why they shut down in meetings. He said, it drives me nuts. He said, I know that they perform 8 to 9% better than the men, but whenever we're in a group, he said, it's like 8th grade science class. He said, the men will take over, and these women who I know are better at sales because I know their numbers, they just shut down. And he said, if you could do something, I would love to support you and things like that. And that led us on a journey to creating a women in sales program. We've had a couple iterations of it to get it right. And we finally have gotten it right. I have a partner. Her name is Gina Stracuzzi. She was just recently announced as one of the top 50 most powerful women in sales by Demand Base. And here's the answer to that question, which I have discovered over the years, having worked with hundreds of amazing, well, men and women in sales. If you were to ask a guy, hey, how would you solve this problem? All of a sudden, this, Doug, you and I would come up with three answers. We would say three things we need to do. Number one, number two, and then we wouldn't even know what number three is, but we'd be thinking about it, as we're giving our answers. The women would sit down and they would say, that's an interesting question. Let me think about what the answers might be. Next thing you know, the meeting's over and the men have superseded the women. The other thing that I've learned over the years with our Women in Sales program is if a guy is applying for a job and he meets one of the 10 criteria, he's going to apply and he's going to go after it and sell himself. Well, the women might say, okay, well, I only meet 8 of the 10 specifications, so I'm not going to apply. And we've heard that from hiring managers, and we've heard that from women in sales leaders, and also the women in sales professionals as well. So there are some things that come up time and time again, Doug, that are inherent of how there's a difference. But the one thing that has been so impressive running the Institute for Excellence in Sales is that there are so many talented women that we've come across at companies like Oracle and Microsoft and Cvent Software and Salesforce that are just amazing. They're customer advocates, and they're really committed to doing great work for their companies.
Yeah, and I can hear all the men on this line here listening to this going, Doug, I'm going to get you. Saying women are better than men, right? In sales. It's been my experience that women do outsell men in most cases. Now, I do believe, based on what you and I were just and what you were just talking about, that part of the reason that men kind of are showcased in that fact is they don't, just like you said, if somebody answers a question, we're going to have an answer, boom, that's it, right? But I think women in general, they think through things differently than men. But I also believe that they're far more astute in finding problems and asking questions more than men. Men will tend to direct more. Women will tend to ask more circular questions. That's been my experience. How about yours?
No, that's a great answer too. And as we're saying about this, there obviously are great men in sales, and there are tremendous women in sales too. And to be honest with you, we don't even really have the stats. We've tried to gather some stats to show, if the statistic that CEO had mentioned to me years ago is still valid. And I really can't say that. But what I can say is one of the reasons why we created our Women in Sales program is the mission of the IES is to help employers, right? We're here to help employers get their people better at sales so that they could be more proficient with their customers. And we've noticed a number of things over the years that make it difficult for employers to attract the best employees. Right now, again, we're doing the show in the the late summer, technically, of 2022. The competition for talent is ridiculous. It's so fierce, even with the best companies in the world. We've all heard of the lingering effects of the Great Resignation. And I did on my podcast yesterday, one of the VPs I interviewed called it the Great Reshuffle, as companies are rethinking about how their sales organization is going to be put together, as people are still resistant to going back to an office, right? And customers, in some regard, are still resistant to fully going back. So how do we put our organization together, and how do we be successful? I want to tell one quick story that kind of changed my whole impression on the Women in Sales story. Again, I was very excited when the CEO said you should do this, because it gave us another reason to bring something to the market. And again, the customers that we serve at the Institute for Excellence in Sales are B2B, typically B2B companies in tech, services, hospitality, usually with at least 100 salespeople. So we created our Women in Sales program, and we had two types of people, Doug. We had those who said, they're salespeople. Doesn't matter, male, female, whatever it might be, short, tall, you're a sales professional. You need to be doing sales profession work, if you will. And then there was another group of people, the other side, which said, no, this makes a lot of sense because women need to support each other. And there is inherent biases that discourage, some women from pursuing careers in sales. So we launched our We call it the Women in Sales Leadership Forum. And one of the partners that we brought in was in the first camp. You're in sales. Doesn't matter if you're male or female, you got to do the stuff that's necessary. After 3 sessions of our program, she came to me and she said, I was wrong. She said, I've never really thought about the support that we need to give each other to be successful. And, you see it in different organizations, women in tech and women in hospitality, whoever it might be, about women being champions of each other. And that's been a big part of our program too, is to build that, build those networks across companies and within companies too, of support. Maybe it's a more senior sales professional with a junior sales professional, or people at similar levels, if you will. Something that you and I kind of take for granted. We probably know that we have our supportive networks. I have 10 people I could call right away, but it's different when you're in a separate demographic or separate group that needs a certain type of support to succeed, because the odds are against them to start.
Yeah, and I think in some regards that's what makes them, a superior. Now, men, don't send me hate mail, okay? Because it's been my experience too in running, teams and teams and teams of people, probably 1,000 salespeople over my life. Women usually outsell the men. Now, men, I think because they're more patient in a lot of ways, Fred, because I think, men, we're just so linear to get to the point, let's get the problem done, boom, right? And when we're dealing with, men who are high driver types, that works really well. But there is a whole separate issue of people who are methodical and humanistic, and women, for some reason, can tap into a power that men have a hard time tapping into, the femininity, if you will, the feminine energy. That's what I have found. And so when they're in those situations, they will tend to outsell the men in most cases. And again, I keep thinking about that movie, My Big Fat Greek Wedding, I think it was called, where there was a scene where, the Tula, which the daughter was talking to the mother, and the mother was saying, Tula was saying, I want to marry this guy, but dad will never let me. And the mother said, the man is always the head of the household, but the woman is the neck. She can turn the head any way that she wants. Right?
It's interesting. Yeah, it's interesting you would say this. I mean, right before the pandemic, I did an interview with a sales leader. Her name is Alyssa Merwin, and she's at LinkedIn. So she's one of the top sales leaders at LinkedIn corporate. And this was literally maybe a month or two before the pandemic. And we talked about vulnerability. And she talked about how she was a vulnerable sales leader, and she was an open book, and she was honest with her people. And of course she should be honest, but she was, to the vulnerable level, getting a little bit deeper than just, hey, I'm concerned that we're going to make our number, this quarter type of a thing. And it was a very well received podcast that we did. And I launched it in early 2020. And the reason I referenced that one was that was kind of one of the first that we had done of my over 550 Sales Game Changers podcasts, where that was the angle. And it was very, very well received. Well, obviously the pandemic kicks in. And one of the big words, Doug, that we talk about all the time is empathy, right? And empathy is table stakes to be successful. If you can't be empathetic towards your customer, and it's not sympathetic, and it's not, those kinds of things. Empathetic means just basically being able to put yourself in the position where you understand where your customer is coming from. And a lot of men, I found in the beginning, were struggling with that. And it was probably the most commonly uttered word, maybe besides value, over the entire course of the over 300 shows that we've done during the pandemic. We even had one episode, it was maybe 4 months after the pandemic kicked in, where someone asked a question to one of our speakers. We were doing our podcast live at the time. And the question was, when can we start taking a break from being empathetic? And my guest, who was a senior VP in many different industries, his name is Dan Cole. Dan said, if you have to take a break from being empathetic, you better go to the beach, take a day and really process it, because sales is all about being empathetic. And it's truly about understanding what your customer's going through.
Yeah. And I think we, being empathetic and guiding, but sales has changed. And we all agree to this, right? Especially it's now shifted from more of a interruption based to a permission based type process. And I think and again, it's just been, when I look over the numbers that I've had over the years with women versus men, women will tend to out edge the men. And I think it's because who was it? Blair Singer wrote a book called Sales Dogs, and it described salespeople as different types of dogs, right? But I think with the shift that's happened, there's more empathetic sales dogs now than there ever was in the past. You can't be that pit bull type person to come in and still be as successful as one was in the past. So, that Labrador retriever, the golden retriever, or, something of that nature is much, much better received. And I think part of it, Fred, is, and I'm really looking for your feedback on this one. I think part of it is, before, sales corporate wise, especially, and business wise, used to be made at the sales meetings more so. Now, the majority of the decision is being made up prior to even meeting with the salesperson. And it's more of a fulfillment and who's the right fit for us versus, do we actually need this any longer? So the need's already established up front. What's your thought on that?
Oh, absolutely. It's one of my good friends. I think you may know him. Tom Snyder used to run Huthwaite, and he's been a frequent speaker at the Institute for Excellence in Sales and a frequent guest on my podcast. I was in a meeting with him once, and he said sales professionals used to be walking brochures. And I remember being in meetings. I worked at Apple and Compaq, and we would have full day meetings where the sales professional would present our roadmap, right? And because the customers wanted to know, where are you going, Apple and Compaq, in the next 5-10 years, so that they can prepare. You don't need that anymore from the sales professional. You can get that probably on the internet just by Googling, Apple product roadmap or something. But at the time, that was a main function. And we all know now that the customer can get from, not just from the internet, but from social marketing, social media, I should say, all the information that they need. So the role of the sales professional has radically changed, and the sales professional has a lot more pressure now to be able to show that they truly understand what the customer needs. And it's not just from a product perspective, it's usually from a solution perspective, to meet the demands and the needs of their customers. So the profession has changed. You can't, as we're talking about this, the one thing that we need to still keep in mind is that the sales professionals still need to lead the way at their companies. It's still about revenue. It's still about, how do we get our customer to exchange, make transactions with us for the products or solutions or services, whatever it might be. And it's usually the sales professionals, the great ones, the good ones, who are doing that. But you're right. It's the value and the role has radically changed over the last 5, 10, 15 years.
We're speaking with Mr. Fred Diamond for the Institute for Excellence in Sales. We're talking about women in sales, and I find this fascinating subject personally. As I said, Fred, I have 3 of them in my household, all selling now or grooming to be, knock down top 1% salespeople in their respective lives. Public eye. Let's talk about getting out in the public view. Right? Because I think in the past, men had done a much better job at doing this than women have. But I think there's far more women now in power of leadership roles that are coming along. And I'm seeing, PR being, when I look at it, I'm seeing women getting more into the PR side and getting into that public square and getting the message out and positioning themselves better than even sometimes the male colleagues that are within the company. And they're embracing that a lot better than men are. I was just curious, any thoughts on why that might be happening? I mean, you're dealing with women all the time. And this may be an unfair question because I didn't even, think we were going to ask this, but any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, there's been a lot of movement in society, of course, with some very powerful, there's always been powerful women, and there's a lot of women who've been very successful in sales. It's interesting, we in our Women in Sales Leadership Forum, we have 2 types of facilitators. We have women who are 30-year sales professionals, and then we also have a lot of facilitators, people who train for a living, if you will. And the women who have been the 30-year professionals, almost all their stories are the same. 30 years ago, they were the only woman in the room. And, a lot of the cliche type things, they were asked to get coffee and all those kinds of things. But, the ones who really succeeded, they all talk about how they've had someone who supported them, or a mentor or someone who kind of took them under the wing and, gave them some guidance on how they need to be more effective with the customer and how they need to become more powerful as a sales professional. But there's been so much happening, Doug, over the last 5-10 years. And you go back to like a lot of people in politics, the Michelle Obamas of the world,
Right.
who gave women they could see a powerful woman, not having the traditional type of roles, if you will. And that led to women in more industries. As we think about women in sales also, one of the things that we've noticed is that there's been some inherent biases that discouraged women from moving into sales. And there are industries, of course, pharmaceutical, there's a lot of women, even though we have some of the top pharmaceutical companies involved with the Institute to attract more women into professional sales. Hospitality, there's a lot of women in sales, if you will. Tech, not as much, but they're starting as more women move into college degrees with technology or engineering, and then they could take those skills and then apply them to the sales profession. I'll tell a quick, interesting story about this bias that we talk about. We were interviewing, again, we launched our premier women in sales employer. This never even occurred to me. We were asking senior VPs of sales, women typically, what would make a great employer for women in sales? There's what makes a great employer for sales, but then what would make a great employer for women in sales? Because the needs are different in a lot of ways. One thing that was discussed was the concept of the networking activities. We talk about team building, bringing the team together, right? And that they're, in a lot of cases, even with best intentions, they're inherently biased to men, like golf outings, right? So you heard a lot of the last couple of years of, women should learn how to play golf because it's a networking event that we're going to do, and deals are made on the golf course, if you will. It's probably not a bad thing for a woman to play golf, but to be honest with you, you and I are probably going to get more excited if, the company says, hey, we're going to go play golf for the day, than most of the women will. So one of the women that we interviewed for our application process for Premier Women in Sales Employer, she said, I argued that golf is fine, but at the same time, we should also have a day at the spa, for the women who would prefer that type of a network or team building type of a thing. Didn't even occur to me. I thought, golf. Okay, well, it's going to be fun. Learn how to play golf, right? Well, that's starting from a man's bias type of a thing. And there's a lot of those things that you and I don't even think about that are out there that the women in sales who've been participating in our programs have let us know.
I think you bring up a really cool point, and I don't know if everybody caught this, but we as men, most of us are, I'm not going to say clueless, but we're not that good at cueing in on what women are actually thinking about, right? And sometimes we say women are not good about thinking about us as well, right? And understanding us. But the fact is that there are far more women coming into leadership roles and decision-making roles. So if I'm a man today, which I am, and I want to learn to sell to women, which I do, and I do quite well, I've got to develop that empathy. I've got to be able to understand what's important to them, because it's no longer that male-dominated space. Because I remember, Fred, when I was growing up, if you had asked me, hey, name a few really powerful women figures, I would have a hard time thinking about it. But I know with having children, they were talking about Michelle Obama. They were talking about Oprah Winfrey. They were talking about, was it Meg, who ran Hewlett Packard, even though I think she got in some trouble or something like that.
Yeah, Meg Whitman.
Meg Whitman, thank you. Yeah. They were talking about people like that. They were looking at books that were written by women on leadership, as well as some of the guys were starting to read them as well. So I think the time has changed. So those of us who are in sales and want to continue to be in sales, I think we've got to adapt as well. And I think we must understand how women actually think. So what you're doing, to me, is something that men should embrace, because this is going to continue to keep growing, no matter what. I was watching a movie the other night called 42 with Jackie Robinson, right? Mm-hmm. And all the crazy things that he endured going through. And I remember one of the themes in the the coach came in and the players were pushing back because they didn't want Jackie Robinson to be on the team because of the color of his skin, basically, right? And the coach said, look, guys, here's the deal. We got a lot of great players coming up. They're all going to have all different colors of skin. You better get used to this because they're hungry and they're looking to take your job. And I think that women now are catching on that they can be successful in that type of world. The ones I'm talking to, especially, they're like, you know what? Look, I can compete with men on any level, but they still have that woman side, the feminine side to them, where, like you said, if they don't have all 10 boxes checked, they're not going to pursue it forward. What do we say to women who are like, I don't have these I don't have these 2 boxes checked, but because to me, good is great, right? And once we get them to great, then we can bring them to top 1%. But the reality is, we can't get them into the field because they're thinking like, well, I don't know if I have all the qualifications to actually get into that. Then I think it's kind of hurting the whole movement of what you're building out. So what do you say to women who are thinking like that?
There's a couple of things. And again, more and more women at college are getting into business, or they're getting into technology or engineering. And we do our Sales Game Changers podcast. Probably like 1 out of every 4 shows, excuse me, we'll be interviewing a woman sales leader. And one of the questions that we ask is, what did you major in college? And most of the ones who are successful in, usually it's tech or professional services sales, were in engineering. Some were actually in sciences like biology or something. And they have that type of analytical thinking, right? A lot of success in sales, it's not, as of course, it's not, what do I got to do, Doug, to get you to buy this, pencil type of a thing. It's thinking through a problem, thinking about how is the customer challenged with solving their customers' challenges. And of course, during the last 2 years, it's how do I help my customer not just solve their challenges and not just their customers' challenges, but because it's a supply chain, there's customers' challenges, right? So, the analytical mindset that a lot more women are being nurtured in college is really a great feeding ground. It's 2 of the things I want to focus on. We give an award every year. It's called our Lifetime Achievement Award, and it's to like a Hall of Famer in sales. We just started a conference earlier this year. It's called the Women in Sales Leadership Elevation Conference. And our Lifetime Achievement recipient from a couple of years ago was a woman named Teresa Carlson. And Teresa led Microsoft Public Sector. She led Amazon Web Services, Global Public Sector. And she was our keynote speaker. And she's brilliant. And she's just a hugely wonderful and successful person. But one thing that she kept harping on was the need to have data. She kept saying, for you to be important in the room, ladies, and we had about 120 women at this conference in May of 2022, you need to come to the table with pertinent data that's going to help leadership understand where we need to go, or help our customers understand how we can help them. I know she kept just pounding away on it, right? And, I could see people just feverishly writing notes. And we keep talking about that too. It's like, it's not, I feel that you should, no, that doesn't mean anything. Customers want hardcore data. They want to understand that you've thought this through and that you've given some prep. The other thing that we recommend all the time is not just having mentors, but having sponsors. And some of the women that we've had in our network who have achieved the highest levels of sales success, reaching VP at companies like Splunk and Microsoft and Amazon Web Services and DataSite, for example, they've all said they've had mentors along the way, but they've also, more importantly, had sponsors. And, the mentor is somebody who can give you some guidance, like, oh, here's how I would handle this. Sponsor is somebody who has power right now, right? And it's going to take you under their wings and make sure that you get invited to the right meetings, and make sure that if they know there's an opportunity out there, that they're going to bring you in because you've proven to them that you should be out there. So, that's one of the things we recommend all the time. Mentors are great. Definitely have them. Sponsor is critical to your success. And thirdly, as I mentioned, data, come to the table with valid facts and things that show that you've thought this through and that what's in the best interest of the customer.
Makes a lot of sense. Fred, I imagine people are saying, okay, cool. I want to get a hold of you. I want to figure out, next steps, how do they access you or your company?
Yeah, well, the best way, of course, to reach me is LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn every day. I typically do one post every day. Usually gets about 6,000 impressions and 100 or so comments. So just search Fred Diamond on LinkedIn. I'm very careful with how I do. I don't overpost. I literally do one post every morning at 7:30. Usually it's one of our podcasts or a poll or maybe one of our events. Every once in a while, I'll do something on the weekend as well. I'm also on Facebook. People can very happily reach out to me on Facebook as well. Sales Game Changers podcast. We do 3 shows a week, and the organization that we run is called the Institute for Excellence in Sales.
Awesome. Fred, I appreciate you being on here. And folks, we're not talking just about women in sales. We're talking about a movement that's actually happening. And it has been happening. And I can tell you some of the greatest sales leaders I've worked with actually are women. And they seem to be natural at coaching far more than men, and they seem to be empathetic when things need to be empathetic. Far more than men. And men, I'm telling you this, that if you're listening to this, because the world's a changing, and if you think 20 years from now it's going to be the same, it won't. And that's the way I see it, Fred. And so I'm so grateful that you came on to this podcast here at the CEO Sales Strategies, and we had this discussion on this very important topic that's moving forward and has been for a while now. And I think the pandemic's actually just escalated it up even more so. So thanks for being here. I really appreciate it.
No, you're welcome. And this has been fun. You did a great job. I appreciate it. You were on my show about 2 years ago, and it was a fantastic show. That's the one thing I want to wrap up on is, as we're talking here, the women in sales who are successful are also great sales professionals. They reach revenue, they bring in revenue to their company. They make deals happen. The great sales professionals, that's what we do. We're about bringing in revenue. We're about making transactions for our company. The way that we go about it may be different. The way that we're going to have to go about it has definitely shifted and morphed over the last couple of years for reasons that we talked to today. But they're students of the game. They work on their game. They work on, how do I get better? How do I provide more value to my customer? How do I team the right way? All of those things are critical to the sales profession. How do I be a more impactful sales professional? So I just want to applaud you for the work that you're doing on helping your listeners and your clients and people who read your book get better at the art and science of selling.
Thanks, Fred. I really appreciate it. So once again, Fred Diamond at the Institute for Excellence in Sales. Thank you for being here, sir.
Thank you.
Well, that was pretty cool, huh? So here's the thing, empathy. Empathy. That is going to take you a long way in selling today. See, most of the decisions are being made prior to them even talking to a salesperson. So if you're a person that's out there even, knocking on doors, better get empathetic. Better understand what homeowners are going through if you're knocking on homeowners' doors in the B2C world. If you're knocking on corporate doors, then you're going to want to know what the corporate folks are thinking in the B2B world. Now, there are a lot of facets that make people successful in sales. One of them, I believe, is drive and hunger. And one of the reasons I believe that women are making such great strides in this is it's not just about selling for them. It's really about a movement. They're really looking not only to be successful and have more money, but they're looking to be more empowered and they're looking to make a statement in the world. And when that happens, people just pay attention more. So if you're going to employ women, understand that they're hungry, they're aggressive, they're looking to get there, but they think differently than men. It's that simple. Not on every single aspect, but they do think differently. And they can bring a great strength and balance to an organization when you, as the employer, look at this and say, okay, I can titrate this in the right way. Also, if you're selling to women, you can learn a lot from studying these type of processes that we're talking about and really delving into, what the psychology is and what's important to them, as well as what's important to the organization. So without further ado, this is Doug C. Brown. I'm going to be signing off here on the CEO Sales Strategies podcast. If you like this episode, and you think, wow, you know what? That's great. I also have a topic that I would love to talk about. And you think it'd be good for the show? reach out to us at YouMatter, YOUMATTER, at ceosalesstrategies.com. We'll be happy to entertain the idea and see if it works. And if so, we'll put you on the podcast. If you love the podcast, please subscribe to it. Please tell other people, give it a great 5-star review if you don't mind. And again, if you want yourself or anybody in your company is looking to get to the top 1% of income earners in selling worldwide or in your state, if you're in the United States, just reach out to me at doug@ceosalesstrategies.com. Until next time, go out and sell things, sell a lot of it, make it profitable, help a lot of people, do a lot of good for the world, and to your success.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the CEO Sales Strategies Podcast. What is something that you learned that you could act on today? Don't forget to schedule it now, or it may never get forward momentum. If you find our content valuable, please leave a favorable review and let us know what you liked. Please also share this with others if the content will help them. For our show notes, other episodes, and more interesting content and resources, please visit ceosalesstrategiespodcast.com. See you soon, and to your continued success,